3 years ago, we adopted a new vision statement as a congregation. Do more good. It came after 2 years of dreaming and praying together about who we are and who God is calling us to be. It came on the heels of our newly adapted mission, derived from what Jesus described as the greatest commandment: love God and love your neighbor as yourselves. At Asbury First, we believe that love leads to life, and a love-filled life naturally calls us to service. And in serving, we only deepen our love and our life. Hence our mission, put simply: love, live, serve, repeat. Love God and neighbor, live fully, serve all, and repeat. We believe that as disciples of Jesus Christ, each and every day, that is our call: to love the world into life. Only how we do it, as history has taught us, matters. God has given us the freedom to choose exactly how we are going to love, and some ways that we think we're loving actually perhaps cause more harm than we intend. And so as we think about it, the freedom that God has given us, we each have to decide each and every day how we are going to live out that mission. At Asbury First, we have stated our desire as simply as we could put it in our vision statement. We want, all things being equal, to do more good. We want to do more good. Only as we've learned over this summer, been reminded over and over again, it's not always clear what that means, or what good looks like, or, frankly, whose good we're talking about. And while we have had a sermon series on our mission and another on our values, to date, I have never inflicted upon you a sermon based solely on our vision, until today. Sorry, friends, it had to come sometime. That's right, today, on this very strange Together in Ministry Sunday, after what has now been a full 6 months of worshiping together virtually, I'm ready to be done with this. I hope I'm not alone. After a summer of struggling both individually and collectively to understand what good looks like, maybe it makes sense to pause and consider it together, lest, as Paul warns, our good be spoken of as evil. It can happen, as we know. Who among us hasn't been in one of those moments in which, in our attempt to do good, we have instead caused harm? When our intentions were good, but the result was not. The outcome was harm for ourselves or for others. When we did the wrong thing, went the wrong direction, voted the wrong way. When our intention was good, but the outcome was harm, which, it turns out, matters. After all, if our good causes harm, how good can it actually be? In other words, friends, maybe the place to begin thinking about doing more good is by starting to do less harm. John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist movement, had these 3 rules for Christian living, these 3 simple rules for his people called Methodists. Doing good was in there. It was number 2, but only after he began with the clearest one: do no harm. The challenge, of course, is that we want to skip to the good. Literally, we want to get to the good part. But if we don't stop for a moment and consider the harm that we may be causing, how can we truly do good? Whatever good we do, if we're still allowing harm, will be fleeting. Now, the challenge is, of course, that none of us really want to think about the harm we might be causing. Nobody really likes to think, if we're honest, about the fact that we might be doing something wrong. We're much more comfortable pointing that out in other people. That's a carefully honed skill over time and nearly perfected in the digital world. As it turns out, it's much easier to criticize when you don't have to look the other person in the eye. We can just type it up and press send or post. Turns out it's nothing new. Part of the human condition is to judge one another. We've seen it all the way since the beginning of time. Paul even was trying to address it in the earliest of churches. He was addressing it in his letter to the church in Rome. Now, they had only been around for a few years, and already they were having challenges with judging one another. Think of what we could do in nearly 200 years. Now, their divisions were about what people were eating, and mostly about the days that people thought of as holiest. That's not typically the things we argue about. But the point is still the same. For Paul, he recognized that for as much as divided them, their main goal, their mission, was still the same: to walk beside one another in love. It didn't matter what people were eating or the differences between people. They were still called to walk alongside one another in love. And as Paul put it, if your brother or sister is being injured by what you eat, then you are no longer walking in love. Do not let what you eat ruin someone else for whom Christ has died. If your brother or sister is being injured by what you eat, that is, what you do, how you are living, you are no longer walking in love. To be clear, this isn't just about food. This is about the way that we live in the world. It's about the way that we reach out to one another. It's about taking an honest, hard look about what we're doing in the world and how it is affecting, intentionally or not, the people around us. But if we're going to do that, it means being honest. It means standing before that mirror and being willing to really look, like standing on the scale after 6 months of COVID. We may not want to see what it says, but how can we address the problem if we don't know the scope of it? The good news, friends, is that we don't have to do it alone. That's why we're here. That's part of what it means to be in the church. Not that we're going to step on the scales together. When we come back, we may very well have temperature readers, but no scales. But we are here to hold up a mirror for one another. We need people like that in our lives, don't we? We need people who are willing to hold up a mirror and ask us to really look, who are willing to point out what's going on in the world, to talk about what's happening in the world, to remind each other of the right direction to face in. It means talking at the very least about what's happening in the world. Now, not everybody prefers that we do that. Some, as I have been reminded so many times, would prefer that I just stick to the Bible, just talk about what's in the Bible and don't get into that other stuff, what so many call, quote unquote, politics, which in the church is typically a blanket term covering anything with which we disagree. The challenge, of course, is that the church is of its very nature political, in the classic sense of the word. That is, we have as our main concern right living in the world. The word politic comes from the same Greek root as the word polis, that is, city, that place where people live together. Who, let's be honest, wants to leave the right ordering of life together to the politicians? Friends, it's our job. That's who we are as a church. Not that it's easy or that it doesn't come with consequences. Look at Jesus. Let's be honest. Jesus wasn't killed for telling people to love one another. He was killed because he dared confront the harm that was being done in his day. Do you see? He confronted the political reality of his day, and he paid the ultimate price. Part of what I love about Paul's letter to the Romans is that it's so honest about who we are as human beings. It's so honest about the fact that divisions are going to form. Even amongst people of faith, there are going to be moments when we feel divided from one another. Sometimes it's a physical divide like we're feeling now, and sometimes it's ideological. Paul even weighed in on what he thought, hence his conversation about who is strong and who is weak. But in the end, he seemed to recognize that the division is not the main thing. That despite all that divided the church in Rome, he wanted them to remember that thing which brought them together: the God who made them all. Friends, the same thing is true for us. We are here to be a shining example to the world that we don't have to think the same way, to face in the same direction. To remind this world that so long as harm is being done to my neighbor, harm is being done to me, that there is no good outside the common good, that we have a responsibility to work for it together. Nobody is perfect. There was one once, but we killed him. Nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes. We all do something wrong from time to time. We will all cause harm, intentionally or not, but the good news of God's grace is that we don't have to be perfect to be loved. None of us are perfect, and yet we are still loved. The promise of grace is that there's nothing we can do or say to lose the love of God. So friends, what are we afraid of? Why not take on that self-examination, that self-critical look, to take a look in the mirror and find out what it is we are doing personally that is perhaps causing harm in this world, and once we see it, to start to change it. Consider the present moment. We have spent the last few months dealing with the twin pandemics of COVID-19 and racism. One has been around for a lot longer than the other, but both have asked us to sacrifice something. Only it turns out one is a lot easier than the other. Let's be honest, it's much easier to wear a face mask, to wash our hands, to stay inside, to work from home, than it is to confront the systematic reality of racism in our country. Nonetheless, that is what we are being called to do. To stand before the mirror and figuring out how we are participating in it. Sure, we would love to just keep it at arm's length, to keep it out there, to not really think about it. And if you look like me, it's possible to do that. After all, as I said in a sermon earlier this summer, I live in a country where, because of the color of my skin, I don't have to think about the color of my skin. But the truth is, friends, that's not true for everyone. And so long as harm is being done to my neighbor, harm is being done to me. For too many people in this world, the color of their skin is the number one predictor of life outcomes, from health to health care, to education, to housing, to life expectancy itself, to any number of other factors. Pick your poison. It's not enough to just not feel ill will towards people of color. It's not enough to just not do harm. We have to actually do good. But if we're going to do it, we have to start by recognizing the harm that we have been a part of. It doesn't matter if we have black friends, or if we go to the protests or put our signs in our yards. We have to daily commit to the task of being anti-racist. We have to daily commit to the task of being a part of the conversation. We have to daily take a look in the mirror and ask, how are we participating in those systems of racism? And because I have loud and clear received the feedback that people don't like to be challenged on how they may be participating in the system of racism, let me save you an email by telling you how I have been. my commitment to this congregation, to my Lord, has been to be honest and to try and confront the realities of racism in my own life, to confront the ways that I have participated in this system. To be clear, I harbor no ill will towards people of color. I hope I don't treat people any differently. And I have dedicated so much of my life and ministry to trying to bridge divides wherever I find them. But that doesn't mean I haven't done harm along the way. I have spent this summer in earnest self-reflection, reading, and in prayer, and in conversation, to try and actually see the ways that I have been a part of racism. Here is just one example. I have a PhD, which among other things means that I spent, in addition to 13 years in K-12 education, 4 years in undergraduate, 3 years in seminary, and when you count coursework, research, and writing, another 6 years in doctoral work. That is, for those counting at home, 26 years of formal education. 26 years, during which time I had exactly 2 black teachers. 2. One of whom was a small group leader. Now, some at home may be saying, how does that make you racist? And the answer is, it doesn't. But this does. That until this summer, I never noticed. I didn't think about it. I never stopped to ask why, and worse, I never considered that I might have missed something as a result. Do you see? For all the public declarations and my heart which cries out for inclusion and equality, implicitly, I bought into the racist ideology that I didn't have to learn from people of color. I can't change the harm that has already been done. You can't unring a bell, undo harm, but I can, from this moment, make a concerted effort to do more good. I can, from this moment, try and think about how do I stop the harm? What are the books that I will pick up? What are the conversations I will be a part of? What are the ways that I will foster relationships in my life, and with whom? Friends, we can't change the past. But by God's grace and some self-reflection, we can commit to the daily task of doing less harm. And if enough of us can do that, then maybe, just maybe, we can do more good. May it be so. Amen.